I would like to welcome everybody to this to our webinar. I'm particularly pleased with your presence today, and of course to see so many familiar faces. The content and format of our webinar today is different. However, in order to support our principles and values, we have asked two of our coalition directors, to talk about the content of their most recent books and also provide you with an opportunity to ask them questions. We are joined by two very active members of our board of directors, Dr. Nancy McNaughton and Dr. Ken Harris. Nancy and Ken have agreed to introduce and ask each questions. Now, I was negligent by not opening our webinar by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territories of the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. An important step in reconciliation is our acknowledgement of traditional land. I'm going to begin today by introducing Nancy, who will welcome and introduce Rose LeMay, and then following their discussion and presentation, I will ask Ken Harris to introduce Devon. We want this session to be interactive, so please put your questions in the chat or raise your hand for Nancy and Ken to draw upon. We prefer questions in the chat. Perhaps mute your microphones, and if you can turn your video off until you wish to speak. We anticipate this webinar will be no more than 90 minutes. I am pleased to introduce Nancy now and get started. And again, thank you everyone for attending. Dr. Nancy McNaughton works with many professional groups, both within and beyond healthcare, designing and delivering curriculum, assessments, evaluation programs, research projects, and remediation activities. Nancy has worked in police education for over 20 years, and more recently community health care workers, focusing on the critical connections between effective communication, problem solving, decision making, and implementation strategies, with special attention to responding to people experiencing mental and emotional crisis. Nancy is an assistant professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Toronto and a scientist with the Wilson Center for Research and Education. And again, I reiterate, a very active member of our board, and I'm most appreciative that you're here, Nancy, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Yes, and I'm thrilled to have been invited to speak with Rose LeMay about her new book, and I'm going to introduce Rose now. So Rose is an unrelenting champion for the inclusion and well-being of Indigenous peoples. As a facilitator and training in cultural competence and anti-racism, she has supported thousands of Canadians from coast to coast to coast to deepen understanding and capacity for reconciliation. Rose is in-demand keynote speaker, trainer, and writer on Indigenous inclusion and reconciliation. She has a regular column in the Hill Times, Canada's politics and government news service. Rose is also a certified First Nations health manager and a 2021 Global Pluralism finalist, and she's also a board member with our Coalition for Canadian Police Reform. So welcome, Rose, and thank you so much for being here to talk about this, and congratulations on your book.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's an important read, and it's a really rich read, and it's not always an easy one. So to start, let me know, I'd like to do a little description of the book itself, because I don't know that many people have actually read it yet, but they will as soon as we have this conversation. So Rose LeMay's book, Ally as a Verb, A Guide to Reconciliation with Indigenous Peoples, is an invitation to learn hard truths about our Canadian history and to embrace action through resources that cover a range of possibilities. Rose LeMay has a clear writing voice and generosity as an educator that infuses every chapter. Chapters describe different aspects of the historical and current relationships between Canada, government, people, institutions, and the accompanying challenges. It is often an emotional read, and in the end, a hopeful one. Each chapter finishes with suggested possible actions we can take to become allies, and true to her decades as an educator, she recognizes the importance of starting small and of learning. What is the closest Indigenous community to where you live? What is their story? To learn a little bit about the history that surrounds you. Empathy is at the heart of this book and of Rose LeMay's message to us all to care enough to experience discomforting truths and to take steps to reach across a gap in order to begin a relationship based in humility for all that we do not know, recognition, action, and hope. So Ally as a Verb is one of Indigo's most anticipated in 2025, a bestseller on Amazon already because it's just out, and an editor's pick for Book Life reviews, and is available now in local bookstores as well as on Amazon, I have to say. So welcome, Rose. This is such a rich read, and as I said, not always an easy one. I had to put it down a couple of times myself just to take a break. Even having heard, right, much of the information before, it still never really gets easier. So to start, before we talk about your book, I'm wondering if it's okay if I can ask you about your Tinglet name that I discovered on, yeah.
Sure. My other name is Badi, and it's actually Kwakwaka'wakw. It's not Tlingit. I'm also adopted into a First Nation on Vancouver Island. So that's very meaningful for me. And it's a thing that First Nations, we have family all over the place, but this was a really influential chief who and his wife who traditionally adopted me, which means I'm part of that community as well. And don't laugh out loud at this, it means cougar, but it means cougar meaning the one who watches from afar and then to kind of suss out the whole situation, then acts very decisively.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So since not everybody has read this book, I'm wondering if you can say just a few words about why you wrote it now, maybe especially now, what brought you to write this book at this point?
Why now? It's interesting because when I wrote it a year ago, it was a very different world. At that time, I wrote it to answer the question for allies, which I routinely get when I'm giving keynotes or training. Allies will come up to me and ask, but what do I do? And so this book really is to answer that question, and essentially is to have enough knowledge. One doesn't need to be a history prof. One just hasn't have enough knowledge about history to understand what has truly happened factually and objectively to First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. And with that knowledge, the reason for reconciliation becomes much more clear. Without that knowledge, we might debate the need for reconciliation. So the book asks, number one, out of four things. Number one is to have enough knowledge about history. Number two, to have enough capacity and cultural competence to build effective relationships with First Nations, with Inuit, with Métis, at work, in your neighborhoods, in your networks. Number three is to have enough courage, because the more that you interact with Indigenous peoples, the more your eyes will be open to the amount of racism that currently exists in this world. And once you open your eyes, you can't actually close them again. So that requires courage. And number four, commitment to then change those things, which are continuing to enable the racism, continuing to enable this complete lack of equity and health outcomes and policing and justice and you name it. There are stats stacked all over the place around how Indigenous peoples are not doing as well as other Canadians. So enough knowledge, enough capacity, enough courage, and enough commitment to change those things. So we don't leave this for our kids. This is on us. This should not be dragged out for generation upon generation. We should be acting as if this is urgent. Otherwise, we're not acting.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. So I mentioned it earlier that it is an emotional read. And there may be people who have not heard this information before, who read it and may be shocked and, feel guilt or regret or, all those whole range of emotions when one learns something that one hasn't known before. And you write beautifully about this in the book. And I'm just wondering if you can say a little bit more about that, about how you address it in the book.
There was a point right after the announcement of the 215 from Kamloops that I truly think that Canada actually entered into reconciliation. I'm not sure we were doing anything before that really made a difference. But I think on that day, Canada really just stopped completely still in shock, and we were unable to continue to close our eyes to what had gone on. They weren't schools. They were institutions, that children died by the thousands, intentionally and unintentionally both. And many allies, those who I would have viewed as being well on their way of doing action, were really struck, almost guilt struck, to not be able to move. And I started to really think about how to support the emotional journey of an ally. Not that everybody has to be supported. For those who want to be supported in that emotional journey, be aware that it's an emotional journey. And Indigenous peoples, we've been through a number of emotional journeys, and perhaps we are more able to emote publicly because we do it so often. And there is a small lesson in the book to be okay with emotion. This is how we bring our whole selves to work. We bring our whole selves to life. If it doesn't touch us, I'd actually be very worried.
There's something that can happen though in terms of guilt, which is paralyzing, right? So instead of actually having it initiate action towards change and doing something, it can paralyze some people. So I think that's also really a difficult one. And my next question has to do with, in the many sessions that you've delivered and you are delivering, and I've attended a number of sessions delivered by First Nations individuals. I'm always struck not only by the generosity of the leaders who are leading these sessions, but inevitably at some point during the event or the lecture or the workshop, I can sense a kind of exhaustion, a kind of right in the delivery. They're just kind of exhausted, and there's something about the burden, right, of enlightening people who may be learning for the first time about the Canadian history, the cultural and social impacts of colonialism, and it costs you educators, right? So I'm curious about how that works for you as well. How do you make it through that, right?
Well, and Nancy, you would understand it, with a background in adult education. I can't be the learning object.
Yes.
The learning's not about me. It's not about my experience. I don't want it to be about me. And then the irony of it in adults and educational environments is that sometimes that personal connection is one of the most powerful. That's a choice that I get to make. That's not the choice learners get to make. So my decision as an adult educator is when I choose to be vulnerable, when I don't choose to be vulnerable. The learning should still come across without me being vulnerable. There's been times in the past where I didn't have enough knowledge or experience, and people would say, this is terrible, by the way, don't ever say this in a learning environment. Oh, but I want to see a real residential school survivor. It's like, no, you don't get to say that. If you can't figure out the truth from the history books and learning about it, having a survivor in the room is not going to make the difference.
Right.
Putting the layer of adult education on it creates protection for me. It creates protection actually for learners too. This is the knowledge. It helps when we're personally touched, but we should not have to be personally touched to do the right thing.
Thank you. And I think that also goes back to this idea of guilt being paralyzing, right? It shouldn't be a paralyzing experience to be learning something that is important, right? It shouldn't lead to paralysis. It shouldn't lead to that level of emotional kind of devastation, for sure.
No, it shouldn't. And many people will say that I come across generally as quite gentle, because in adult education, I need you to hear me.
Yes.
I choose to use words that people in the room, people in front of me are willing to hear. And so when I was giving the example of bringing a survivor into the room, that was not my adult educator voice. That was perhaps a little bit of some pent-up frustration on previous experiences.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So there are a couple of spots in the book that stood out for me. One was your reference to the act of calling in rather than calling out. And I'm wondering if you can say a little bit more about what that means or what that might entail.
It's been a learning journey for me. So it's so funny. I also have a background in conflict resolution. And you're old as me, conflict resolution tend to come out of the legal world. The legal world tends to be around assertiveness and directiveness, and the conflict resolution courses that I was taking tended to reflect that a bit. And then Julie Cafley actually had sat me down once and said, if you believe in adult education, you actually have to believe that people are willing to learn more to do better. And that means call them in with an expectation that they want to learn more to do better.
Mm-hmm.
Give them that option to learn. Calling out, there's a place and a time for it, especially when safety is at risk. But a sense of calling in puts it a different tone, a different feeling on it, and it brings a sense of potential.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. The other one that I loved your story in the book about this, is the difference between equity and equality, which is so important. If you could say a few words about that. I don't know if you want to tell the whole story if people are going to read the book, but I mean, it was a lovely example of that difference.
It's I worked forever, it feels like forever, a couple decades in the wide world of health promotion nationally and internationally. And there's a theory around equity and equality. Equality meaning we're giving everybody the same thing, be it a police procedure, health care, same 10 questions from a doctor, everybody gets the same thing. And it sounds on its surface like, isn't that a good thing? Shouldn't we treat everybody equally? But it's completely untrue. We're all different. We all come from different cultures. We all come from different strengths and different weaknesses, different times in our lives. How about we treat each other like you want to be treated today? Equality and equity is the difference between if we're all trying to climb up this cliff and we're all stuck on this narrow ledge, which is kind of crumbling beneath us. It's 10 feet down, and the rope on top is an equal length of rope. And the person on top equally throws it down, and it only comes down 3 feet. And so a tall guy can reach out and grab it, good to go. I might, at 5'7", just barely be able to reach and barely just scramble over and probably scraped and bleeding and scared, but I might make it. But people who are shorter than me might not. It's kind of a rugged analogy that equality means throwing everybody the same amount of rope, whereas equity means at least throwing the rope to their reach or building an escalator. Let's not put people through all this. Equality versus equity. It will probably result in some questions from Indigenous people. Should Indigenous peoples achieve equity? And there's a good discussion about it. I think when First Nations and Inuit and Métis peoples are served with excellence, just as any other Canadian, in healthcare, in policing, in what may be, we likely are going to do much better than other Canadians because of our strength of community, because of our strength of culture. I kind of sidestep is equity good enough? But equity is definitely required to start.
Yeah. Thank you. And given that we're here with the Coalition for Canadian Police Reform, is there anything you want to say or add about policing in Canada at this point in time, and maybe how your book could shed light on a way forward? Or
I really hope that my book creates curiosity for officers who are standing on the line today to learn more about history. You're not responsible as police officers for the history that happened, why the Northwest Mounted Police, when it was set up, was really to corral First Nations onto their little plots of land. That was one of the main reasons. But you're responsible to correct the history now. And so what do you need to know about history to motivate you to do things differently? Learn more about history. And then learn more about the racism which currently exists. And perhaps that also will create or build some more compassion. I can't describe actually what it's like to experience racism to you on a regular basis. There's just no words for me to describe it. In the end, I don't want you to feel it.
Mhm.
Right? If I'm going to be ethical, I don't want you to feel this. But I need you to understand enough that when you become more aware that racism just exists against Indigenous peoples, it might increase your compassion. And you might see as officers the potential in Indigenous people standing in front of you. But that requires some more knowledge. It also requires your motivation and courage to learn more.
Great, thank you. You're reminding me of something Mary Simon said, the time to say that we didn't know has passed, right? It's passed. So before we close, is there anything else you'd like to share about your book that we haven't spoken about? And I know I've kind of left all the resources that you offer in the end of each of the chapter alone, but they're wonderful. Like they're everything from television shows you can watch to theater productions you could go to books you can read to, right? So I really appreciated that. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm going on the road a little bit. If you want to hear more about the book, I'm going to be in Toronto on April 29th. It's on Eventbrite. I'm on Vancouver and May 1st. And back here in Ottawa, Ottawa's Writers Fest on May 4th. It should be a really interesting conversation. I'm going to be on the stage with Bruce McIver. Some of you may know him. He's a lawyer. He's written a lot also about reconciliation. So find me on LinkedIn. All those dates are on my LinkedIn posts, but would love to see you there.
Thank you. Thank you, Rose.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah, thank you. So back over to Dave, is it?
Yes, thank you, Nancy and Rose in particular. Very much appreciated. We're going to hold some of our questions in the Q&A that is in the chat to the end. And at this stage, I'm particularly pleased to introduce Dr. Ken Harris, also a very active member of our board of directors. Ken is a professor emeritus at the Schulich, I believe it's pronounced, School of Medicine and Dentistry at the University of Western Ontario, having spent 25 years in active teaching and practice of vascular surgery. During his time at Western, he served as the Richard Ivey Chair of Surgery, as well as an Associate Dean, Postgraduate Medical Education. Subsequently, Ken was the Director of Office of Specialty Education and later the Vice CEO of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada. And in 2022, he retired from the Royal College, and I must say that we were most fortunate on John Lilly's initiative to have Ken join our board, and Ken has been very active. I am particularly pleased, Ken, welcome you and turn it over to you to introduce another associate of mine back many years in Winnipeg, Devon Clunis. Ken?
Great, thank you, Dave. Just before I do that, I think I've been appointed the book model for the day. So I'll hold up both books so everyone gets an idea about what they're looking for. So it's my pleasure to introduce Devon Clunis. He's spent 29 years with the Winnipeg Police Service, rising from a recruit through the chief of police. After completing that time, he continued his commitment to improving policing excellence through private consulting, and was actually tapped on the shoulder by the government of Ontario to set up an inspectorate for policing. But in his book, he outlines so much more than that journey: his leadership skills, his innovations, his engagement, his commitment to hope and to people. But I think what I'm being asked to do is rather ironic, to the point of nonsensical. Being asked to introduce the author of an autobiography that we're about to discuss with the author in the room raises the big question in my mind: why am I talking? So, Devon, perhaps we can get you to start just by giving us an idea about what inspired you to share this amazing story with the world. And I understand it wasn't a directly linear process. You stepped away from it for a while. What inspired you to come back? And thank you very much for coming back and doing creating this book.
Well, thank you very much, Ken, for that introduction. And before I begin, I want to say to you, Rose, just listening to you, I see that we have so much in common. Being a member of the board is one thing, but I'm getting so much out of just this session and just listening to you and how much we share in terms of bringing unity to this country and the equity that you talked about. So thank you very much for that. But Ken, in terms of what inspired me, it was never my desire to write a story about Devon Clunis. And this is something similar to what you also said, Rose. I really didn't want it to be about me. And during my time in policing, people would always say to me, like, your story is inspiring, you need to write it. It wasn't really a strong desire. When I announced my retirement in 2016, I started writing my story, and then I shared some of it with my wife, Perline, and she said it would make a really good children's story. And I thought my writing is kind of childish. No, she said, but the story is just so inspirational in terms of people seeing the potential in a child. So I really set the adult autobiography aside and wrote The Little Boy from Jamaica, really just encouraging kids to say there are opportunities here. But the main theme in The Little Boy from Jamaica was that one act of kindness can change a person's life and set them on a whole new course, because it was my grade 6 teacher, after I had failed grade 6, who believed in me, and I had to repeat grade 6, but that teacher was there faithfully to assist me, and I became a top student. I looked at the journey in my life, became a police officer. I went back and I found her and I thanked her for the impact she had on my life. And so I had absolutely forgotten about even thinking about writing an adult book. I did the job with the inspectorate. After George Floyd, I took that job on simply because I didn't like the direction that we're moving in culturally in terms of the division between police and community, black and white. It really took on a life of its own. And I said, there's got to be something that I could do. I wasn't looking for a job. Actually, when I applied for the position, the first thing I told the panel was, I'm not looking for a job, don't want a job. And I was shocked that they actually called me back an hour later and said, we want you to take the position, because it was not a job for me, it was a purpose. And after that was established, I still recognize there's this huge divide, culturally speaking, and I wanted to do more about that. So I continued in the consulting work. I do consulting work in the US and our country. But all of it is predicated on trying to rebuild that unity between police and the community, because I do believe policing, effective policing, plays a critical role in civil society. We simply cannot survive without it, but I don't like where we're at. And I know there's a lot of change that needs to come in policing, but there's also a lot of change that needs to come in community as a whole. We need to recognize either side cannot exist without the other. So how do we do this collectively? And I have to tell you, I spent a lot of time away in the winters. And, it was last year, I was away and I kept being woken up at really odd hours, like 2 and 3 a.m. Let me tell you, even when I was chief of police, unless I received a call, I slept like a baby. But I was continually being woken up. And I'm going to be very honest and open with you in this group. I'm a person of faith. And one night I just said, like, God, what is it? What is it that you want from me? Why am I waking up at these hours? And it just became very clear, this book. You need to write the book, but the book is not about Devon Clunis. And I tell people very clearly, it's not about me. I simply use my story as a backdrop to say, we're in this very divided place. But if we each do the best that we can, one singular act of kindness, and recognizing that we need one another, that yes, we have different shades, colors of our skin, different ethnic and cultural background, but at the end of the day, if we could start to see people as people first and foremost, and we start treating each other with a sense of dignity and respect, all of these things, that we need to recognize that we're one. And that's why the title of the book is One. Yes, we're incredibly diverse, but at the end of the day, we're on this common journey, human beings wanting to have a good experience while we're here. And we need to start seeing one another that way and start treating people with that sense of equity that Rose talked about. So for me, it really was all about that. Let's recognize the unity in humanity. Each of us if our main desire was simply to go out and do acts of kindness on a regular basis to every single individual, what an incredible world we'd be able to create. So that's why I penned the book. And it's like I couldn't find rest until I started writing that thing, and it just kind of flowed out. And at the end, I end each chapter, and again, here in your book, Rose, I can't wait to read it, but I end each chapter with a number of questions. And the reason I have those questions is I say this, as I speak across this country, people are feeling incredibly divided. They're feeling afraid to have meaningful conversations because, heaven forbid, they say they're trying to learn and grow, but it might come out the wrong way. Immediately, people are being labeled. We're creating more division. And so there's a lot of fear right across our country right now in culture. And for me, I say the only thing that grows in that environment is fear, is more division and negativity. So first, those questions is simply to say to us individually, introspectively, start thinking about this, but then maybe get together in small groups and go over these questions. And I really think we need to get reconnected. And during the time of COVID and George Floyd, people were trying to deal with real difficult issues in isolation, and there was no understanding ever built. And right now we're just growing further apart. So the whole desire was, can you use your story, Devon, to try to start bringing people back together and unite us? That was what inspired it, sir.
Well, thank you. I have so many questions, and I don't think you could answer any of them with a simple yes or no. One of the things that really struck me as I was reading the book, in fact, I made a few notes about it, was your thoughts of people first inside out. And I wonder if I can get you to expand a bit on it, because I think we'd all love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And all my policing, that was the way that I saw the world. In all of my leadership, it's people first. And Rose, this will resonate with you because Winnipeg has one of the largest urban Indigenous populations across the country, if not the largest. And certainly overrepresented in policing, in the justice system, all of that. And when I became a police officer, obviously people were trying to tell me, okay, here's what you're going to be experiencing with Indigenous people. And I remember, even as a constable, saying to myself, nope, I will not be taking anybody else's opinion. I'm going to form my own opinion. I'm going to see people first. I remember walking the beat on Main Street and seeing, individuals in what we would call the worst situations, the homeless, destitute. And I would simply treat these people with that sense of dignity that we're talking about. I'm seeing you as a person. I would say sir or ma'am. And honestly, I could see the lights that would go on in somebody's eyes when the guy in uniform would treat them with that sense of dignity and respect. And again, not preaching at anyone. I remember the partners were like, Devon, why are you doing that? And I'm like, I just think that's what God would have me do. See people first. And these are the conditions they're in, but how do I help them now rise up and out of those conditions? And if we had more time, I have some amazing stories I could tell you where people who are in real destitute conditions, because I saw them as people first, the transformation that took place. Just like Miss Hannah saw that little boy, like remember, 1975 in the city of Winnipeg diversity wasn't even a thing. There were not a lot of kids like me in the class at the time, but Miss Hannah saw a little boy first, not a little black boy, and she dedicated her time to me, changed the course of my entire life. So my mindset was, let's see people first. As I became a leader in the organization, I was often transferred to the areas of the organization that they were the worst. No other leader wanted to go there. But I would go and I would say, all I'm going to do is see people as people. And I'm going to take care of their own emotional and mental well-being before I even think about the operational issues. And it was amazing what would happen in every single one of those areas. When you focus on the people first, all the operational issues just seem to kind of fix themselves. And it was the same philosophy when I became chief of police. We were murder and crime capital of the country. And people were expecting that I'd be asking for more police officers, but I did not. I talked about seeing every single member of the organization first, and even our citizens, and even the so-called bad guys as people first. And believe it or not, with no additional police officers, no additional expenditures on policing, we became the example of effective policing, and people said it looked like a miracle had occurred in our city by the time I retired. So when we see people, and I think that's what's missing right now, we're not seeing people. We're seeing issues and we're making people the problem, and we're not dealing with the issues. we're just creating more division. So if we just start to see one another first, the humanity that we all possess, I think it'll be transformational.
That's a compelling and deep message. Clearly, through your progress, you were able to inculcate some of that philosophy into some of the units you work with. But I guess I'm troubled when I look at the world, and the big world, but also the small world in which I live. How do we get people to start dealing with each other with respect, listening, and the go forward, the hopeful attitude that you espouse in your book? How do you take it from what you can do to getting everyone else to adopt that?
Once again, I think, and again, Rose, you'll be doing it, I'll be doing it. I want to travel across this country and do exactly what we're doing here. It's not about the size, and I'm actually glad it's a smaller group so we can actually engage. It's about getting back to having those meaningful conversations. But I will say this, leadership does matter. And so I'm a little concerned sometimes when I see who's at the helm of some of our democracies right now, because people will. But at the same time, I say this, let's not forget that most of the power still resides amongst us, the populace. So we have to really engage the populace. I can tell you this, one of the proudest moments in my entire career was after I announced my retirement. And I went to serve at a soup kitchen. And again, the homeless were coming in and being served by us, and I was in uniform. And person after person came in and said, we know who you are. You're the chief of police. Since you became chief, your officers started treating us differently. I wasn't there at those odd hours of night when our members are dealing with people on the front lines. But I'm saying when leadership sets the right tone and the message and vision in front of those who are leading and say, this is who we are, this is who we can be, and here are the actions that we can take to accomplish that, I have found that the vast majority will follow. And so when we think about the state that we're in now culturally, I think if we go out and we share the message effectively, and I like what you said, Rose, in terms of calling people in and using words and phrases so that they'll actually hear what you have to say, that you're not blaming what you're saying, you have a responsibility to help correct. I think, Ken, that is actually how we transform this country. I know we set a better example for the rest of the world in terms of how we're supposed to do equity, in terms of this incredibly diverse nation that we're in. We're incredibly divided right now. And if we don't have people standing up and starting to speak about it, again, in a healthy way, I think 5 or 10 years from now, we'll look back and say, how did we get here? And I agree with you again, Rose, we should not leave this for our children to deal with. So that's why I had to write what I write, and that's why I stand up on the stage and I share the things that I share, because it really is about the future and that we have a responsibility right now to help lead us in the right direction.
I can't let the moment pass without thanking both you, Devon, and you, Rose, for your courage, your leadership, and encourage you to keep going, because I think it is making a difference. So thank you. Devon, and in seeing you as I've gotten to know you through the Coalition for Canadian Police Reform, and that you're clearly a confident and accomplished person. Did you learn anything new about yourself as you were writing the book?
So here's the thing that I learned, because as you're moving along in your life and in your career, you're just doing what you think you're supposed to do. But I went all the way back and I write about being in high school and being the captain of the basketball team, as a constable, stepping out on issues that I thought were really important, even though I wasn't the boss. And I'm like, I guess there's a part of me that just always had this willingness to step out front. When I started talking about crime prevention through social development, everyone looked at me as if, what is wrong with this guy? Why aren't you not talking about the crime? And I'm like, no, we need to deal with the social issues. So I just realized, though, even all the way back in high school in grade 10, our team had ran into some difficulties. And I was the one who stepped forward and went to the coach and said, here's what happened. I'm not going to tell you who did it, but we're taking responsibility. So I've always been willing to step out front of these situations. I say, it's not because I'm courageous or anything. Sometimes I think maybe it's just because I'm foolish. But when I see an issue, and it has to be addressed, I've consistently been willing to step out front of that issue. And I think right now, in terms of what we're doing here, and Rose, you're doing exactly the same thing, there's a time, and if we miss the opportunity to act right now, I'm very concerned about what the future will look like. So, you know, I said very clearly in the book, and I said, when I applied to become a police officer in 1987, the issue of a Black person becoming a police officer, I was afraid that my community was going to disown me because they'd be thinking I'm going over to the other side, but I still did it because I thought it was the right thing to do. When I decided to write this book, I was very concerned that a lot of people would think, oh, what are you doing, Devon? Because I'm talking about issues which are very challenging, but I feel like we have a responsibility. And so I've been consistent about that piece. So that's the one thing I've seen about my character throughout my journey. So I was glad to recognize that. It's not that I'm doing something silly now. I've always been doing these silly things.
Well, I'm glad you're doing them. Do you, within the book, in several places within the book, talk about crime prevention rather than dealing with the criminals, but crime prevention through social development? And I think this would be a great time if you'd like to elaborate a bit on that.
Absolutely. I don't think any young person decides, okay, you know, I'm going to find myself arrested and locked up. For example, we talk about the situation that Indigenous peoples are so overrepresented, not because they're more criminally prone than a Black person or anybody else, but I said, look at the social conditions that Indigenous people exist in this country. I say, you take any group of people and put them in that environment, we would have the same outcome. So once again, let's not be blaming people for the situation they're in. Let's look at what we have created and the structures and the environment that we have them in. Because as I said very clearly, any group of people under those circumstances would have the same outcome. So when I talk about crime prevention through social development, I take it back to education. Where would I be if I didn't have Miss Hannah who stepped in to support me? Where would I be if my mother wasn't very firm in terms of raising us? So when we put the right social structures, healthy social structures in place, I think we would see that crime would diminish significantly. We'd have a need for fewer police officers, not more. So if we ever think that by having bigger prisons, more police officers, we're going to fix the social issues, no. If we fix the social issues, then we realize we'll have lesser need for incarceration and policing and all of those issues. What's going on in our country right now, I said very clearly, and I said very public, and I even said it when I was chief of police, because I spoke about the fact that Indigenous peoples are overrepresented. And some were saying, well, that's not what a chief of police should be talking about. I said, absolutely, that's what a chief of police should be talking about. And in this country, I say, there's no way we should have less than third world conditions for Indigenous peoples. Unacceptable. And so those are the things that we need to deal with. If we deal with those issues, we'll see over time that that representation will be more balanced. But we can't simply say, blame a group of people when we have put them in that situation. So crime prevention through social development is dealing with the social issues at the root of crime rather than constantly dealing with the symptoms. And as I said, we did that during my time, and it was amazing the reduction in crime that we saw. And I tell you this, the membership fully took hold of it. Most of the important things that occurred in the city during my time as chief, they weren't necessarily police related. And it was the members coming forward with these ideas saying, hey, why don't we do this instead? And none of it was about law enforcement. It was about helping the social conditions in the city. Yeah.
Fantastic insight, fantastic advice. The chat is sort of going ballistic, and I think everyone wants to become involved in some of this discussion. Is there anything else you'd like to highlight about the book, or anything you'd like to bring out about the book? And then this is just a warning to others. I think we can then look at having everyone become involved in this discussion.
For me, the key piece is what I started with in terms of, let's start seeing people first, and let's just each decide that we're going to go out and do an act of kindness, a genuine act of kindness to help one individual. That's what Miss Hannah did for me, and I've been able to touch thousands of lives because one teacher decided, rather than just seeing a little boy, that Black boy, and saying he's not very smart, let me invest in him. And so imagine if every single person would do that for one person. All these issues we're talking about would be fixed overnight. So we need to focus again. The power is in the populace. It's not just in one particular leader, it's in us.
Well, thank you. The Miss Hannah's story really resonated with me for a variety of reasons. So, well, my final question to you is: when they turn your movie into a book, who do you want to play the lead role?
I'll have to think about that, sir. Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be a great day. I look forward to that. If you have any connections, let's work on it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for this. Now, we didn't actually discuss who was going to actually moderate the chat, but I think Holly has perhaps had her hand raised for the longest period of time. Shall we let her go first?
Yeah, let's go.
It was just such a great talk. I was just eager to just jump in everywhere, and it was just awesome, folks. You know, thanks for that. Thanks for speaking on the things that need to be spoken on. That was very powerful. That was just amazing, and I absolutely agree on so many things. And, you know, that said, settler people, it's okay. Can we also say that? We know that these things have happened over a very long period of time, and they're going to take a very long time to rebuild and reconnect, you know, all the things. So, you know, I don't even like saying it. Rome wasn't built in a day, but, you know, cliche as it is, it's true. It's going to take a very long time. Our people talk about the 7 generations principle, right? And I'll give you an example. I'm 48 years old. My children are 23 and 25. They are the first generation in my family that have not gone to an Indian day school or an Indian residential school. That's now. Like this is going to take a way long time. So please, settler people, know, we know it's going to take a long time, but let us work toward it at least. That's all. Miigwech.
Miigwech. Yeah. So yeah, there is stuff in. I mean, so clearly, I have an educational bias here, but really, you know, when I'm listening to you both, I'm thinking about a number of things. So thank you both. One is this idea that each one of us has a responsibility for the culture that we're actually creating. And then I think about structural racism that you wrote about in your book, Rose, and how the systems and the structures in which people are actually trying to survive are also really challenging. And so the values and attitudes that we hope, right, we can actually embed through education still come up against these, like, is that the way to kind of make a dent in the structural racism, in the systemic, you know, discrimination that is such a force in many instances? I mean, it's not a very clear question, but I mean, it's both and, right? So where do we start? I mean, an act of kindness is absolutely essential and lovely, and yes, and yeah.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, please do. Please do.
One of the things that we face in Canada as Indigenous peoples is that the racism has been baked in legally, and has been baked in for so many years now. It started really in the 1850s. It started in one of the first laws, which was blatantly against Indigenous peoples, was 1857, that all First Nations would have to have chief and council, whatever your traditional mode of governance before that. Irrelevant. If you want us to talk to you, the new settler government, you have to have chief and council, and of course they have to be men.
Right,
I mean, the amount of racism is like we're like fish in water almost. We almost take it for granted this is the way it is.
Yeah.
How much strength then it takes to rise above all of that and start to question things which some of our leaders don't. Some of our leaders don't at all. But that doesn't, it makes it difficult to name, but we do need to name it. The only way to change a problem is name it head on. To call in racism when it's individual or interpersonal, but also to call it out, call it in, call it out, whichever is going to work best in the whatever scenario. Systemic racism. Sense that all Indigenous peoples will. And I often train on, well, think about it, and please don't say this out loud, but if you were to insert any other group in this country, all blank are, you would catch yourself. You'd get this sense in your gut, oh, don't say that out loud. And yet there's still almost a lack of consequence for saying that sometimes about Indigenous people. So we have to name the racism, name the problem, then we get to change it.
Great. Yep. Absolutely. Thank you.
Devon, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, absolutely. Rose, I'd love to hear your perspective because I talk about racism in my book as well. And obviously the Indigenous experience is quite different from mine. I'm not comparing the two. And thinking about it more so from the immigrant perspective. And I said, and even myself in 2002, after my first promotion, I was called to deliver anti-racism training to members of the organization. And I remember walking in, and these are colleagues that I've grown up in the organization with, who I could never say were ever openly racist. And again, it's about the language and the conversation and how. So I walked in and the arms were folded and I said, you know what? I got to tell you, I don't even like the name of this course. I said, the minute I say it's anti, I'm telling you that you are. I said, but you may not understand a lot of things about a Jamaican, right? So I'm going to want to learn about that. And there's stuff that I don't understand about you. And so we want to learn. We talked about cultural competency. But in terms of the structural racism that you talk about, I think absolutely it's there and we have to break that down. But I got away from just using the term racism because sometimes I think it just becomes a catch-all and we're not dealing with the real issues. Like the discrimination that Indigenous peoples face in this country, it is so blatant, it is so obvious, we need to deal with it. I talked about that as a chief of police. But I wonder if we need to make any type of a shift. I'm talking in terms of how we use the term just racism so generally that I think to some people they're almost losing like exactly what is it that you mean. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Sure, but I'm not sure what to say. Wow.
Yeah.
It's a big question.
It is a big one.
Most of my work is in the health sector, and it turns out in the health sector there's a clear readiness to talk about racism, given that we lost Joyce Echaquan on video in the healthcare system. And so I think this is actually sector specific, and I think it's also regional specific. Both the openness to reconciliation, the openness to inclusion, and the openness to speak about racism. I guess, for example, in BC, it continues to be much more, okay, not all areas of BC, thinking about certain candidates in BC, but there are regional differences. I also like to use the word racism because there's so much research about it. So I don't want to, I'm personally not changing the word right now. So it also, the third reason is it gives us an opening to talk about intentional and unintentional racism. And Devon, I'm sure you've heard this in your career and probably even the last few days, to experience something which just smacks of racism. And by the way, when I experience it, it is. It's not open for debate. It's kind of like, when a woman says she's been sexually harassed and you say, oh, but was your skirt too short? When an Indigenous person says, I experienced racism, you have to take it at face value. There's no other reason why not to. When we then get into, oh, but I didn't mean it. And let me tell you, in a professional environment, that doesn't cut it. We are held to account in a professional environment on your impact on others, not what is bumbling around in your head. And so that's the one thing that when I use the term racism, we get to actually call in that dodge. Racism is the impact on others. It's not what you intended. It's not what you, it's none of that. It's actually how it impacts differentially on people of different races and social structure.
So Bruce has his hand raised. John, you had your hand raised before. Are you still?
Go ahead, John, if you want.
Oh, you go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, it's more of a comment, and it's what I'm picking up from both the speakers today, which I sure appreciate. And it's something that I think that I picked up at university, and that is education taught me to see the people. Education taught me to look outside my own little world, and education.
Bruce, we've had some freeze up on
It
your.
didn't make me a better investigator, other than I'm sure it helped with some critical thinking. I'm going to turn my video off. It is, and can Devon you hear me? Devon.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll turn the video off. It might be doing too much.
Yep,
I was just, I'll cut to the chase. Education is what showed me, as both of you were saying, that we have to look at people as people. It made me a better human. It made me a better critical thinker and evaluator of who I'm dealing with as a policeman, which played a big part in my decisions, but it didn't make me a better investigator as such. The education, and I guess this could be part of a question here, how do we get to the point where people are not so insulted by saying an education would make you a better person? And because there isn't anything that says you need a BA in such and such to be a good police officer. They're going to rely, and I hate this phrase, it just takes common sense. It's part of it, but it's not all of it. The education was the all of it. And I'll leave with that. Maybe it'll generate conversation, but that's what I'm picking up from you guys. Am I picking it up right? Because that's been my experience.
Education is the key.
Go ahead, Devon.
No, go ahead. No, I just said education is the key, most definitely.
For sure. Education is the key for civic understanding. What it means to play a role in one's own democracy, including in policing what role they're supposed to play. This is all predicated on education. When we lose that, we start losing whole planks of our democracy.
Absolutely. We've got raised hands.
Can I make?
Yeah, go Dave.
Nancy, can I make a quick comment on from both Rose and Devon? From our perspective, the coalition and the shift that we think is important in the knowledge of particularly young police officers. The basic training, as I think Devon alluded to the term law enforcement, the basic training is built around law enforcement. Peel's principles and prevention and working with the community are long since lost. And the point that was really important is that Mike has even taken a little bit farther. Perhaps our organization shouldn't have been called the Coalition for Canadian Police Reform, but the Coalition for Canadian Police Training and Education, or just education. And there is no doubt in my mind that you're both absolutely correct. The broader, and Bruce, the broader education you have, whether it's empathy, compassion, emotional intelligence skills, and all of those things will make an individual, I believe, a better police officer. Devon learned it early in his career. But the present structure is we put these people into this law enforcement culture in 6 months of recruit training. And none of the things that we've talked about that are so important in dealing with human beings, empathy, compassion, emotional intelligence, shift your mind. Mindset, a duty of care, and that's what's lost. That I firmly believe in that. That's what's lost today. And until we have a formal foundational education program around all of those issues, including racism and everything else you can imagine that police officers have to deal with, we will continue to stumble along. And all other professions in our country, nursing, doctors, lawyers, engineers, physiotherapists, and I could list them 10 or 20 of them in length, have a very well-developed foundational entry-level education program into their specific career. And that's what we're trying to achieve with our coalition. Perhaps we stumbled with the term college at the beginning. We really see the National Center of Policing Excellence being a central clearinghouse of best practices and develop the entire educational curriculum, evidence-based, like the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons has done. Ken Harris has brought a wealth of experience to our coalition, and that's a very long-term mission, because as you all know, Devon knows, everyone else knows, police organizations are struggling today to get recruits, and they're recruiting as fast as they can and putting them through this short, narrowly focused law enforcement training program. In fact, I've always said, and I repeat myself, that we take the brightest and the best that we could get for our money in policing, perhaps with social service degrees, accounting degrees and other. Then we put them into this environment where we teach them to conform to rules and regulations. We essentially browbeat them into understanding all of the things that we policing thinks is important in this law enforcement model. And then we turn them out on the street and expect it to solve some very long-standing, very difficult, complex social and racial issues in our country. And we will never be successful unless we, in Canada, I don't believe, unless we see the creation of this National Center of Policing Excellence. And it has tremendous potential for educating our entry-level police officers. And Bruce talked about education. Devon's talked about education. And of course, Mike Federico, our vice president, is focused on that success in our national center. And I will say no more. I see that Bruce has his hand raised, and John Lilly also. Please go ahead.
Devon or Rose, do you wish to respond to Dave?
I didn't hear a question, so no, I don't have any response.
So, John, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Okay, thanks very much, Ken. This is a question to Rose, but I think Devon may have something to weigh in on. This has happened to me many times, and it happened to me this morning. I was at coffee with a group of long-standing friends, and one of the individuals is retired now, like me, but she was the executive director of an inner city health agency. And we were talking about, I took the books. I took one and I took Li as a verb and passed them around. And that's how the conversation started. And Cecilia said, and she's a wise woman, but she said, now and then, you're at an event or you're speaking with somebody and they say something which is at odds with my perspective. She said that the individual said, "Oh, your friend likes to canoe? Well, that's wrong, because us indigenous people invented canoeing, and really they shouldn't." So in a way, that's like reverse reconciliation, or it's a misunderstanding. My perspective would be that if people are canoeing, they're closer to the land and they're going to have a more open mind. So can you help me there, please, Rose?
My suggestion is not to get into the content. That's what in adult education we refer to as a shit disturber response. They just want to raise shit.
Yeah.
Don't get caught in the content.
Right, great. I like that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't put my hand up, but I have an education-related question. I mean, I totally agree. I've spent a lot of my life promoting education, but one of the insights that's come to me is sometimes our traditional education methods, classroom, reading, and that don't actually cut it. Some of it is you need to practice what you're learning, You need to have your actions corrected or improved through adequate feedback and reinforced when they're appropriate. So do we need to be looking at a different model of education, of teaching, these issues which really need to be reflected in action?
That's the how, Ken. I put in the chat about, there's a difference between the what and the how. That's the how, right?
Mhm.
That is the how. For people who go, I don't know what to say, or I'm afraid I'm going to make a mistake. We'll jump in and make a mistake so we can actually have a conversation about, right? About that. I mean, yeah, it's where we live, right? It's where Carrie and I live. I'm waiting for Carrie to jump in here. But yeah, I agree totally. So I'll be quiet now because I know Bruce has his hand up.
And this time I meant to put it up. I keep looking at the clapping hand thing and I hit my hand thing and putting it up by mistake.
Can I jump in just a quick on that, on the how part? When we're trying to raise adults,
the communication part is so important. What I'm
factual information on stats and geography and geology, that's a pretty didactic. We can do it in PowerPoint, but we're actually trying to raise whole adults. We're trying to raise on values, and that's a whole different way of how, and that requires truly skilled educators. There's a difference between growing up in the career and being an educator in every single career. Be it a doctor, a police officer, one doesn't naturally then be a teacher. One learns how to teach, then can teach on content. The very first time that the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons Canada attempted to try to teach cultural competence was in 2002. And I went through a really good process. It's had a really good what in terms of the curriculum, handed over to existing profs who didn't believe in it, whose values didn't align with it, and it completely failed. So the how is incredibly important. It requires those skilled educators that bring a level of art and heart to it.
Thank you. I totally agree. Bruce, you had your hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me now? I've turned my video off again.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, good enough. I'll be short and sweet like me. When I am watching all of you today, I'm picking up what I, as somebody who needs to be educated, needs to hear. And that isn't being told. And maybe this, Rose, is what you're talking about, inviting in, is we have, or at least I know I can have this tendency outside of my professional world to tell people, here's my view, and sometimes I want you to adopt it. And that rarely works. And what worked with me at university was having a few profs that said, well, what do you think? And it was by me speaking and bumbling around and realizing I actually don't have all the answers. Rose, you said this. This was fantastic. You have so many answers, but you were the first person today to say, I don't know. And you allowed other people then to talk and figure it out themselves. It's almost like motivational interviewing, where you get that person to think they came up with it. So it's the good communication skills in with the teaching, with the education skills. But it's, as we say in investigative interviewing, ask for the other person's agenda. Once you know their agenda, their likes and dislikes, morals and values, then you can do some work. But until you figure it out, you're just telling. So this is what I'm picking up from all of you. And if we could suck that out of you and spread it around, we'd have something. So that was just a comment. Thank you.
Nancy, you're on mute.
So, it is about relationships. So, Rose, I'm this. I mean, it's all about relationship with whoever it is that is actually sitting in front of you asking to learn, and what that looks like and how that unfolds is going to be key to what it is they remember and take away with them. And also, it's not always easy, right? It's not always easy.
Oh, it's not always easy, and I don't think we should make the mistake of assuming everybody will come on side.
Yeah.
And that we should be more able to let go of those who don't. There is consequence. If we don't share values and other people's well-being, then no, you shouldn't be a police officer or a doctor or a nurse or a political leader, but don't get me started on that one.
Right. Yeah.
We need to be able to name what is not a passing, not a pass behavior, not a pass entry, not a pass. We need to have that courage too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the courage to state things that we see that are not right.
Mm-hmm.
Dave, you wanted to make a point, and then I think Holly, and then I think we're probably coming close to the end of time, because I'd like to give, if everyone agrees, each author a few minutes just to wrap up.
Yeah.
I agree, Ken, and I'm just going to pass to Holly. Please go ahead.
I was just going to say, it takes an incredible amount of time and energy to do this, good community work, and everybody's doing great and wonderful work. Everybody has purpose. Everybody has role and responsibility. And, I just want to remind folks, self-care, 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 because I'm a firm believer. I need to be a happy, healthy individual first, so that I can be a happy, healthy working group member, community member, mom, auntie, whatever it is, whatever role and responsibility that we have, whatever hat we wear. So please do take care of yourself in whatever way is good and right for you. That's all. Miigwech.
Thank you for that. Rose, do you have any closing comments, inspirational thoughts? You always have inspirational thoughts, but is there anything you'd like to leave us with today?
Well, I'd like to say go buy Devon's book. And vote and tell everybody, take everybody to vote. That we have never had this kind of important election in our lifetimes. And I'm just going to speak honestly, inclusion and reconciliation and DEI, how we build safety for each other in policing and in this country is actually the thing that's on the line. If we vote in a way that turns towards America, we now can see what America is doing. So please get out there and vote. Take everybody.
Thank you. Yeah.
Devon?
How kind of you, Rose. I'm going to hit it back to you. Let's go buy Rose's book, okay? Let's make it cover this entire country. That would be wonderful. Well, what I would like to leave us with is always this, and I do realize, elections are forthcoming, but I said this earlier. I believe the true power honestly lies with us. And if we keep doing things like this, doesn't matter the size of the group, but having meaningful conversations on how we truly educate people, we really need to do it at the very much at the grassroots level. And that's what I am determined to continue doing. And I'm very hopeful for this country. I really am, in spite of everything that we see taking place. I think it's one of the most beautiful countries on the planet. We have our issues, but I know that together we can rectify it. I think there's a desire right now out there, but all it needs is some bit of courageous leadership, healthy, courageous leadership. And I think it's small groups like this that can do that for us. So I'm very optimistic.
And thanks to Dave for his courageous leadership. And Ken and Nancy and Mike and John, you've done so much for this group. We wouldn't all be here without you, so thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much, Rose.
Could I? Yes, thank you. Very kind words, Rose. Could I just conclude by saying one thing that I'm very proud of of Rose, Devon, Nancy, and Ken, and have been since the beginning. They all provide us with not only guidance, but some quiet expression of support, and it means a lot to us. And really keeping our coalition heading in what I think is an important direction. So my sincere appreciation to Nancy, Devon, Ken, and Rose, and I know that our work will continue. I hope you stay with us as long as you can, and I encourage everyone today to please read both books. I think we will all benefit from both of them. So my sincere appreciation to all of you, and thank you everybody for attending.